Welcome. I'm Gaurav Seetharam of the Motley Fool. With me today is Anat Admati, Professor of Finance and Economics at Stanford University. She's the co-author of The Banker's New Clothes, What's Wrong with Banking and What to Do About It. It has been called by Martin Wolf, no less, the best book to emerge from the crisis. So congratulations on that. We'll straight to the questions. Every single time I look at a bank's balance sheet, I'm convinced that there's a lot that I don't know. And I'm not sure of what I don't know. So what is still off the balance sheets?
Oh, a ton of stuff. A lot of the derivatives are off the balance sheet. Even if they are on, they're on in such a way that leaves out a lot of the actual risks. So sometimes it doesn't get on the balance sheet. And a lot of other entities. And that's even kind of the way you see it. It's not down to the level of the millions of different kinds of contracts that are really on there.
But what would happen if those assets were to come on the balance sheet? How would markets react?
Well, I think that the markets right now kind of know that they're there, so I think that the market realizes that the banks are very opaque. This is why the banks don't like to go to markets. They don't like equity investors asking too many questions, so they'd rather just live on debt, on borrowed money.
But if you look at some of the biggest banks in the last 5 years since the crisis, JP Morgan's recovered incredibly well. Wells Fargo's recovered incredibly well.
Mm-hmm.
Even Bank of America's recovered. So, and after their purchase of Countrywide, that was a little bit of a shock to me that they recovered as well as they did, because we don't know where the buck stops. Can you explain that?
Well, they have many ways to make money, and the key to their making money is how much risk they take just through what's called leverage. In other words, when you actually take risk, mostly with borrowed money, mostly with money that's debt money, that magnifies the upside. So if you have a little bit of an upside, it gets magnified many, many times. So these profits are very misleading. We should really remember that 2006 was a very, very profitable year for the banks.
Right. I've been very interested in corporate governance because it's something that's not talked about a lot. The idea that we're sort of presented with a black and white option, which is that either the government imposes regulations on corporations and they're forced to comply with those regulations, or nothing at all, just the Wild West, laissez-faire economics. But are there any new trends in corporate governance that are encouraging signs to you?
Well, corporate governance has to do with who in corporations makes decisions and all the different stakeholders of a corporation. And so there are always issues about what managers want to do versus what shareholders want to do, and it's thought that we somehow have compensation structures that align them. But and that's a whole problem because of the way they measure things. So, what people talk about short-termism and booked, profits and incentives to take risk. That was already a problem with Enron. The problem for the banks is that most of the money, as I said before, is not even at all in the governance.
Okay.
It's depositors' money, it's other creditors' money who are not at all in the governance. And so the stakeholders for the banks are just many more, including taxpayers, who bear the ultimate downside and see none of the upside.
Right.
And that's really where the true governance problem in banking is. And on that's where you need the regulators to step in, because there's so many impacted parties that are not at the table.
So it seems like what you're saying is that the solution has to come from regulation. Do you believe something like the Volcker rule will put a huge dent in?
Not the way it's written right now. The way it's written right now, I wonder about the cost and benefit of that rule, because it became such a monstrous, complicated thing that's like, with a preamble like 1,000 pages that no human being can really decipher, and then to actually live by that and monitor it, it seems incredibly difficult. So some of the simplest parts of it might be a little bit useful, but in the fine-tuning of it and in the exemptions of it, it kind of got mutilated a bit.
So to add a little context, the Volcker rule, for those of our viewers who don't know, is, could you explain it? I mean, you're an expert, but the rationale is what I want to get to after that.
The rationale, the way it was said, was that that banks shouldn't make what's called proprietary trading. So the idea was that they wouldn't speculate or they wouldn't gamble. The problem is that they put exemptions there on sort of something called hedging and something called market making. And the problem is that the trades are just seen in the context. It's very hard to distinguish what you can classify. I mean, Jamie Dimon was trying to say that London Wade was a hedge. And so just you parse each trade,
Right.
maybe the way you can you can do it is the way that the people who did the trade were compensated. Because if you're compensated for profits, you're not hedging. Hedging success means that you actually eliminated some risk. And you're not supposed to actually make money, take risk with that. So the problem is the exemptions made it quite impossible to seriously, implement, at least not in an easy way. Otherwise, it just gives restrictions on, ownership of hedge funds, some other things that are a little bit, more obvious.
Very often the rationality for what banks do is the idea of liquidity. So, Michael Lewis just came out with a book recently called Flash Boys. And for high frequency trading, once again, the rationale is that it gives depth to the market, it increases liquidity. Proprietary trading market making is the exact same rationale. And I'm struck by that because it seems to be the go-to response every time they're attacked. What is your response to that?
Oh, the word liquidity is just a word that's way overused and completely confusing, actually misunderstood what it even means. I mean, liquidity has to do with the ability to convert certain assets to cash. Mm-hmm. And, we do need that, but oftentimes the word is abused because a lot of the problems in banking are said to be, plumbing problems, liquidity problems. So that part is just a completely convenient narrative that's just really meant to disguise what's really wrong. In terms of going to the market liquidity that you're talking about, like high frequency trading, what I have to say to that is that we do not need, for the reasons that trading actually takes place at all, we do not need price discovery every nanosecond. Nobody's using that price to do anything useful for the economy in the next nanosecond that they somehow will be prevented to do. If we, for example, reduced didn't have the illusion of actual continuous time trading, so we traded every second only in a batch, to me that would probably be a good thing.
But to that point, they also use it as the idea of inserting an intermediary and the importance of an intermediary. So, and you see that across the financial spectrum, for options trading. In Chicago, that is the rationale of having the exchange set up the way it is, the idea that an intermediary is important, the idea of financial institutions being involved in everything from the IPO market to the derivatives market to high-frequency trading, is this idea of an intermediary. Can you explain why we don't need an intermediary?
Well, when you have an intermediary, you have to wonder what purpose the intermediary serves. Mm-hmm. It obviously takes fees somehow, it has to survive. And so the question is what economic functions an intermediation serves. Oftentimes, in the case of the bank, if you go back to basic banking, the idea was that the bank has certain expertise. So compare that to peer-to-peer, or what we call disintermediation of lending. Mm-hmm. Well, the banks can become good at choosing the right people to lend to and assessing how risky the loan is, and then setting the right terms for the loan, and then collecting the loans, and all of that are things that they can actually add value by intermediating. So lending is something that they can do. The problem becomes that they don't want to do it, and other people need to do it less efficiently, like peer-to-peer lending. And in exchanges, what ends up happening is that it gives a way sometimes to phenomena like front running and insider trading on the basis of the fact that all of a sudden order flow information and other becomes useful.